Hi, Rabbi Joel. Welcome to our Parsha Shavua, wisdom of the Parsha, this week's Torah reading. We're in a great Parsha this week of Achrei Mot Kedoshim, a double Parsha. And Joel, you're a rabbi at Kol Nefesh Masorti Synagogue in Edgware, and you're also a long-time teacher of the Conservative Yeshiva in Jerusalem. We're calling you from Jerusalem today, and you're one of my favorite rabbis and a really good and long-standing friend.
What do you mean one of?
One of long-standing
Yeah, fair.
friends.
What do you mean one of? What do you mean one of?
I know, but yeah, you're also somebody who always sticks the knife in where possible, which is what makes you a great Rav. Today we're talking about lots of different parts, but the chapter of Parsha that I thought we could start with is the list of Gilui Arayot, the list of different sexual prohibitions, literally meaning uncovering of the flesh, which we also read on Yom Kippur, the Mincha of Yom Kippur, the afternoon service of Yom Kippur. And some communities often skip that chapter. On Yom Kippur afternoon, they don't read chapter 18 of this week's Parsha of Leviticus. They skip to 19 and read something which is a bit more palatable. But it seems important to ask the question, why this long list of sexual prohibitions, and why do the rabbis and Torah-ethically and within the Bible take this list so seriously and so severely? Why do we need to be looking at this material this week?
Okay, thank you for that.
Welcome.
Maybe I'll tie it just to a little bit of the chapter that comes before, which talks about some dietary prohibitions, and specifically the dietary prohibition on blood, which is really emphasized this question of like not consuming blood in chapter 17, and maybe, you know, if you look at those two chapters together, like, you know, some hard that dietary prohibition, that blood taboo is really one of the earliest and deepest. If you look where that emerges, that's coming all the way back to Genesis chapter 9. Like, it goes right the way back to the start. It's one of the most earliest and basic Jewish taboos around consumption. And
not to eat blood which has within it life force.
Yeah, which is probably, it's not exactly clear what that means, but there seems to be actually a blood taboo, like around eating blood at all, because the blood is perceived to be the life force. So maybe you could put it like this. You could say something like, in terms of your basic reality definitions, if you're thinking about like how the world looks from your perspective, the question of what you are and are not allowed to eat and who you do and do not have sex with are basic reality definitions. They are constitutive of like how you see the world, like what's food and what's a sexual partner. Like, first of all, they're basic drives, you know, in the sense that, you know, humans as animals do eating and do sex. And so that's and in some ways, like when you eat and when you have sex, you can sort of catch yourself being an animal, as it were, like you're connected to your carnality in a deep way. It might be really impossible to eat and have sex without being connected to carnality. Like, however fancy a restaurant you go to, and however married you are, and however you tie it up with sweet bows, there's going to be an element of consumption and sexual behavior where you partake of the tiger, like where you're in touch with your tiger, and where, you know, so there's that sense that it's basic, and so the question of your core animality, and then the limitations placed on that, what do I eat and who do I have sex with, are they're definitional. For example, and I'll just keep talking until you interrupt me. But for example, like, when I sit down to eat, or if when you have friends over to the table, everyone knows that the rule of the game is, well, actually, let me frame it a different way. This would be even better. I'm sitting with my family having dinner, and it's me and Susanna and the two girls, and we're sitting having dinner together. Now, there's a ritual. Almost all cultures have rituals around food consumption, and many of those are to do with the etiquette of keeping it safe and ordered. I mean, it's a time of the day when you're sitting down with sharp implements in your hands, close to other people. So there's an inherent danger in sitting down there normally, with a knife, say, on the table. And you might need a knife to cut up whatever it is you're going to eat. And that knife could also cut the people at the table. So if I was furious and out of control, that could be a very dangerous space. Actually, the truth is, dinner table is it's always dangerous. There's always people behaving badly, and certainly in my house, the dinner table, it's like a place where we all come together. So it's built in, there's going to be violence or danger associated with it. But the question of, like, what am I going to eat is a basic reality. First question is, am I going to eat the people who come and sit down with me? Am I going to eat the other? Are they food? Is the other person who's sitting opposite you at the table food? And the answer has got to be no. That has to be built in some kind of profound way. That if I'm sitting down there and deciding what I'm going to eat, well, like, I'm going to say I'm eating a piece of meat, which, truth is, I'm the only person in my family who eats meat now, so which is a shame upon me. But I'm sitting down and eating a juicy piece of meat, and in terms of the structure and shape and taste of that meat, I would imagine it probably doesn't differ that much from cooking part of one of my daughters and eating that as well. It's composed of fats and proteins and carbohydrates, and probably with the proper seasoning, it would probably taste pretty good if I ate one of my daughters. But it's taken for granted that I don't eat my children. And that's a basic reality definition. I mean, I'm going to eat an animal. I'm not going to eat why? Where does that idea come from, that we don't eat people and that we do eat animals? And so that's a question you have to play that one out. And the same question is obviously true about sex. Right. I'm sitting down with my daughters, and are they potential mates with me? And the answer is no. And so a list of people who you can't have sex with, which needs to be deeply internalized in some profound way, so that there is not the temptation of sexual behavior, is about a fundamental reality definition. My children need to sit down at that table knowing I'm A, not going to eat them, and B, not going to try and mate with them. And I think my daughters do know that, Baruch Hashem.
So that seems to be an important classification as to why this material is brought in front of us on this Shabbat. Yeah. And the bit that I'm interested in, the bit that we kind of connected with just before we started filming, is also like the importance of putting that front and center. Yeah. There's the assumption in community, and I think it's probably the same for Muslim, Jewish, Hindu, Christian communities and non-religious communities, is that it's always not in our families, not in our communities. So the kind of sexual the sexual sins that describe, depravities that's described in this week's Parsha, not in my home, never heard of it, not in my community, not in North London, not in West Jerusalem, not there. But the story is they are. The story is that we know of these levels of abuse and these levels of kind of mistreatment in all of our communities, and we largely and happily ignore those parts of the story because it makes us sleep better at night. Well, and once a year in this week's Parsha, it's put front and center, and we're asked to address and re-establish those norms, even if it's our least favorite Parsha, our least favorite task to take on.
I mean, look, those things happen, but that's why the Bible says don't do them. Like the Bible doesn't tell you not to do things that no one was ever doing. Like one of the kind of glaring absences from the Bible is a prohibition on eating human flesh. Now, that isn't because there's no humans on the planet who eat human flesh. There are humans on the planet, a very small proportion of people, but none of them, I think, were around the Middle East in the time when the Bible was being composed. So there's no prohibition written there because there was no one being naughty that way.
Right.
So which isn't to say that eating human flesh is okay. Of course, it isn't okay, but it isn't there because no one did it. Whereas all these things people do. Like, God, all these things. The reason why they're in the Bible isn't because no one does them. They're in the Bible because people do them, and people need to be told not to do them, and they also need to be told not just that certain things are naughty, but that certain things are abominable, which
Right.
means that they have an ichs factor.
So with that in mind,
yeah,
I think most of the list, most people in our communities, at least in principle, can agree are abominable, are beyond the pale. Yeah. And then there's one aspect in the list, which is one of the reasons why some communities refuse to bring this into their Yom Kippur service, which is the prohibition of sleeping with another man like you would sleep, a man sleeping with another man like you would sleep with a woman, which is traditionally understood as a prohibition against homosexual sexual relationships. Right. That's a really big thing for our LGBTQ plus communities. That's written into the fabric of the Torah, and very hard to face on this Shabbat and any other week that we would study this portion. We're running out of time, but I would like you to say in your closing one word about that inclusion of that prohibition in this list of toavot, on this list of sexual sins.
Right. Again, so first of all, the reason why it was there, even in ancient times, the reason why it was there is because it was real, and if it wasn't real, it wouldn't have been listed. That's the first thing. Second thing is, we are not biblical Jews, and the question of the working out of the meaning of the Bible is one that is handed to the ongoing evolving traditions of Judaism, and the rabbis did a huge amount of work reframing all sorts of parts of the Bible for over history, and we're bound to, in a legal sense, we are bound to the meaning of the Bible as reflected through the prism of ongoing Jewish life. We're not bound to the literal meaning of the text as it appears. And the fact that no one did work on that verse on 1822 over the course of history is because that wasn't one of the things that the rabbis were deeply troubled by. They were happy with fundamental reality definition being that men should not sleep with men, and that was ichsa, and that was a disgusting thing. They were people, they didn't try and do work on that because, as far as they were concerned, they could see the simple meaning of the text, and that aligned with the kind of world that they wanted to live in. But in other places, the rabbis were prepared to do the work. The question is whether the Jews who are around nowadays are prepared to do the work to reframe some of this stuff and to find the true meaning of that verse. It clearly can't be allowed to mean, from my perspective, the pshat. Can't be the pshat, because we're not bound to the pshat of any text. We're bound to the religious meaning, not the historical meaning of a text. And that's true for my relationship with any verse in the Bible. I am bound to the legal religious meaning of verses in the Torah. I'm not bound to the literal meaning of verses in the Torah. And then the question is, which I don't think we have time to do now, and then the question is, are the rabbis and people of our generation brave enough to take that text and to turn it into what it needs to be turned into?
Right. So I guess the shout out for this week is a shout out of inclusion, at least in my mind, and the work to be done is to learn these texts at greater depth and find that note of continuity, inclusion, and challenge of the text as we arrive at this portion each year. And I think we've got to leave it there, but you can have one more word.
Yeah, and the flip of it is not to lose yourself in the bits that you don't like. The real question is, what does it mean to take that list seriously and to take sexual restrictions seriously, to take the notion that there are things that we don't do sexually and that they in some way ontologically prior, in some way they have a hold over us, and that it's not like a green light in terms of what we consume. We don't have a green light to consume whatever we want, and in terms of our sexual relations, we don't have a green light to do whatever we want. that autonomy is not the goal of human life. It's not that we are pursuing a world where we can do what the hell we want. And that, on the contrary, we are bound, and that sanctity is in some way tied up with limiting our most basic urges for consumption of both food and sexual pleasure.
No, and I guess wrapping up, I also am called to say, in this generation of an exposing of sexual impropriety, particularly, well, among all sectors of society, whether it be in schools or whether it be in Hollywood or whether it be in sectors, parts of the royal family, we are called to reinvest in some of the established, or reconnect with some of the established norms around consent and around ethics in sexual relationships, and in around sex not just being a private, discrete place where anything goes, because that is not, doesn't seem to be serving of either sexual partner in any context. So it's a call also this week, in some guys around to finish up, some guys other front also to reconnect on what having an ethical perspective on our sexual relationships looks like.
A limiting, a limiting
and a self-limiting, yeah.
Yeah.
Rabbi Joel, thank you. Much love to Jerusalem, and speak to you very soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Shabbat shalom.